Hi, I'm Aoife. I am one of the MS reporters here with Shiftms at Shiftms 2019. I was diagnosed with MS in 2011, and I'm just about to interview Jeremy Hobart about his take on the quality of life measures over the last 20 years.
Stem cells.
So, can you give us a brief summary of the talk that you've just given?
I can, yeah. So I was asked to give a talk about two scales that we developed 20 years ago, and really to kind of give a bit of an update on them and a bit about how they've been used and how things have evolved over the last 20 years. So I guess I started with the basic outline of what we did, which back in 1997 was, I guess, the right way to do things. And then they've been used a lot. They've contributed to understanding treatment impacts. They've contributed to understanding the impact of disease and to care developments. They've evolved a bit, but actually, if we were really honest, the way that we develop the instruments is not the way we would do it now. And that is because of advances in the science and advances in what's called regulation. So that's all the regulatory bodies who approve or not treatments for diseases like MS. So I kind of brought in that bit at the end to essentially say that whilst the scales are really useful and can be used for various contexts, that really we need a new generation of instruments.
Okay, so we're 20 years on from it.
Yeah.
What have we learned in that 20 years?
Well, I've got 20 years older, which is less good. What have we learnt? We have learnt that the disease is more impactful than neurologists would have thought. We've learnt that the disease is much more impactful much earlier than neurologists would have thought. We've learnt there are huge discrepancies between some of the tests we use in routine practice, MRI, neurological examinations, and the experiences that people have. Now, I don't think that's rocket science, and I think it's what people really would expect, but this formalizes the situation. So we learn a lot about the impact, and we also learn that treatments and types of care intervention can influence both the various aspects of the impact of the disease. So it's all important and good.
And can you tell us about the different kind of MS specific scales and measures?
Yes, there's lots of them.
Top 5.
Well,
top
okay.
3 maybe.
Okay, so I'll turn that question around a bit, if I may.
Sure.
Because the selection of a scale or the suitability of a scale depends very much on the context of what you want to do. So if you are looking for something to assist your day-to-day clinical practice for managing individual people, that may be very different than something you might want to use in a study where you are looking at an intervention in a group of people. So it's hard to give you the kind of top 5,
Okay.
because it does depend on setting the context as specifically as possible. And it's not just the context in terms of, is this a trial or is it clinical practice? It's then the context in terms of the people you are using or seeing or managing in those contexts. So in clinical trials, for example, we tend to talk about primary progressive MS, secondary progressive MS, and relapsing remitting MS, but within each of those there are different levels of problems, and there are early disease and later disease, and more disabled and less disabled, more problematic and less problematic. And those contexts actually are required to help you select the best thing for what you want to do, if that helps. And what the bit I tried to get across here today is that we as a field need to invest much more time in being very specific about the contexts that we want to use scales, and the concepts we want to measure to get more accurate results. Because we use terms like quality of life, but we don't define it. And it means different things to different people.